evening, everyone. We are more than happy to have Mathew Hughes on board today. This is the second time we have him with us at la Fabrique l'exportation. The first presentation he gave like almost 2 years ago was about the specificities of family firms in their internationalizing development. Now we're going to have a more specific issue, since times have changed a little in between. So first of all, let me introduce Matt. Matt is a professor in entrepreneurship and innovation at Loughborough University. Loughborough is a town 200 kilometers north from London. Am I right, Matt?
Yeah, sounds about right to me.
Okay. Okay.
That way.
Okay, so you work at School of Business and Economics at Loughborough University, and your research deal with entrepreneurship, family businesses, and internationalization. Okay. So you won several awards and distinctions for your research and teaching activities. Well, the list is pretty long, so I'm not going to mention.
Jean-Christophe.
That's true. Well, the topic of our session today is how to be resilient and enter a new market in COVID times. First of all, we think that this issue is important because many companies have delayed, postponed projects and investment they had before. And now, since the worst seems to be behind us, they are preparing to launch and start the projects that have been postponed. And second, many companies are trying to take advantage of the trouble we are facing now to start a new business, to launch a new product and enter a new market in a more offensive goal and strategy. So you are going to give us some, I would say, advice and insights into how to optimize the possibility and to maximize the chances to be successful in these pretty chaotic times we are in now. So, Matt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. That's very kind of you. So let me try some French. So, bonsoir, madame et monsieur. Je m'appelle Matt. So please call me Matt. Literally nobody uses my full name. So you know, you're very welcome to use that. I'm quite laid back. So I'm originally from Wales, the little country stuck onto the side of England. So that's where I'm originally from, and yeah, I work in Loughborough University as we stand. Let me share my screen, and hopefully this will work. So let me know if you can see it. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Good. Good. Okay, I've messed this up a couple of times where people see my notes slide instead of my actual slides. So that's very good. Yeah, so what I'll be focusing on today then is the issue of how to be resilient and enter a new market or launch a new product, however we want to define entering a new market. And this is really building on both my research, but not solely my research. So one of the things that I got up to in the pandemic, pivoting, so to speak, is I decided to develop a podcast series where I interviewed entrepreneurs, business people, family businesses, academics, to understand what can we do, you know, how can we become resilient? But in my mind, resilience is not enough. And not only do you need to be resilient, you know, hard-shelled, have an ability to endure, you also need to be resurgent. And I think what I want to concentrate, the two parts of my talk, is on one hand, what is resilience? What does that mean for us? And two, how can we have resurgence? How can we come out of this pandemic and grow and be, you know, thrive ideally coming out of it? Jean-Christophe very kindly introduced me, so I'll keep this nice and brief. But one of the other things that I've been up to recently is I am the founding director of what we call the Centre for Corporate Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Despite the name, we're actually interested in the entire life cycle of businesses, both from startup to growth to well-established, large, small, young, old, multinational, domestic, what have you. You know, we're interested in this full spectrum, and that's what I think what makes us different. But what ties to this is that my object of interest has always been the firm. So how can we go about building, managing, and sustaining the innovative organization? I suppose that, in a nutshell, is what I'm interested in and what I've been researching for years. And you'll see this come through in the things that I have to say during the next half hour. Okay, so in terms of the agenda then, so I'm going to cover predominantly three things. One is, what does it mean for our businesses to be resilient? So both as a property rather than as a state, and I'll try and emphasize why that difference matters. Next is this idea of moving from resilience to resurgence. I have some examples that I want to use along the way just to give you a different perspective on how some companies have thrived, and flip side, how some companies have struggled, and more importantly, why, and some of the issues around that. And then finally, we will look at entering a new market or launching a new product in COVID-19 times and beyond, because I think one of the things we have to be mindful of is, I get the distinct feeling with this pandemic that, you know, even when it ends, it's not going to be over. And what I mean by that is there are going to be some effects that continue to resonate, continue to take hold. And, you know, if I just diverge for a moment, even if we go back to the 2007 to 2010 financial crisis, what we saw was a change in behavior. That was both in terms of organizations, in terms of customers, and so on. And we're seeing it again, changes in trends such as remote work, the change in buying patterns from consumers. It's extremely likely that these trends will continue post-pandemic. So it's something that we're going to have to also, you know, consider in our planning. The other thing, as I mentioned, so this is, everything I'm going to talk about is built on my knowledge and research, but also a podcast series that I've been doing, and you can find these on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify and on SoundCloud if you are not interested in using one of those two apps. So yeah, please, I highly encourage you to have a look at that and have a listen. I hope it's a useful resource. I think that the slides are already with Tom, and Tom, you've got my permission to share them if you need to. So yeah, so it's a bit difficult to distill about 6 or 7 podcasts into half an hour, but I'm going to cover the major bits, and but I would encourage you to have a listen, because there's some really interesting insights in there. Okay, so the first thing I want to get off my chest is this new normal, right? We've seen this a lot in the news, that we are now living in new normal times, and the COVID-19 crisis has created a new normal. Actually, no. And I want to give you some reassuring news that actually, no, we are not in the new normal. The concept of a new normal was set in 2010 by Mohammed El-Arain in his Per Jacobson lecture called Navigating the New Normal in Industrial Countries. So actually, we've been living in a so-called new normal for almost a decade. So it might help us to understand what do we even mean by new normal then? And so really, it's this concept that grew out of the financial crisis, that we are living in a situation of heightened uncertainty, and crisis events are becoming more frequent and more normal. So even as a business, we face things like floods, natural disasters, the fall of globalization, populism, Trumpian economics, and even though, Trump is no longer the president, but there, there are resonating effects. Now we have the pandemic, and not just the pandemic, we have new strains. But even prior to that, we had SARS, bird flu, and then financial crisis, and of course, not to say the climate crisis. So, my point here is to just reassure you a bit that yes, things are changing, but really this concept of new normal is actually not new. The real issue here that we have to continually grapple with is uncertainty. This is the core of it. What the pandemic has done is just increase the scale of uncertainty. So, if you watch the French 24-hour news channel, for example, you're going to be bombarded with breaking news. It seems like every few minutes we have breaking news. And part of that is, the news media desire for consumption. It's a product, simple. And but the point is, it's uncertainty, right? And this uncertainty is now everywhere, and it's this increasing amount and the increasing number of concurrent crises that is really defining this new normal. So for us then, it means that resilience means we have to make judgments under uncertainty, knowing we can't predict the outcome. So now more than ever, we're making judgments and knowing it's becoming harder and harder to predict the outcomes. Where this becomes challenging is in the event of launching a new product, for example, or entering a new market or changing your business model. We can't always be sure of which investments are going to pay off. Now it's even harder. So again, just to reassure you, this was a problem before the pandemic. Take digital transformation. Leading up to the pandemic, the #1 biggest problem facing industrial firms was how do they digitize their business? What platforms do they invest in? Who do they partner with? All of those questions were surrounded by uncertainty, precisely because nobody knew what the end game was going to be. What capabilities do we need? Which alliances should we be developing and with whom? And so, really, the entrepreneurial challenge that senior managers face is all about making good judgment under uncertainty. So that's really, in my mind, at the core of the dilemma that we are facing. In terms of, what does it mean to be resilient? I just wanted to highlight a couple of points. It's not a state, it's a property, and worse still, we invest in resilience in the good times, and we don't know if we have that resilience until bad things happen. And, it's almost like we're always looking backwards, in trying to understand what is making our organization resilient. One thing I want to emphasize is resilience is not inertia. So I have a little background in physics, and here, let me show you. So inertia is not that an object is sitting still. Inertia is that an object is moving in a straight line and will continue to go in the same line. The only thing that will cause it to change direction is a force. Now, why do I say this? Well, it's because you have two choices in this kind of pandemic. One is paralysis. You become resilient by becoming hard-shelled. I would say that's temporary at best because other companies around you are going to make decisions. The other issue is we could try to stay the course. We can adhere to our primary strategy, or we can try and consolidate around our existing strategy. This is inertia, and I don't feel that that is strictly what enables us to survive. Now, in company terms, my biggest worry is that we see a lot of short-term reactions to crisis events. So for example, we see cutting workforce or firing members of staff, headcount reduction. This can potentially backfire for two reasons. One, you're losing valuable human capital. Two, we know that there is an increase in entrepreneurship in recession times. So the people you make redundant go and set up as entrepreneurs. Well, right now, you really need that entrepreneurial talent inside your organization. So, short-term cost-cutting reactions, while, completely justified, they can have unintended consequences. Equally, if you cut down on the scale of your activities or cut down on your value chain or maybe outsource, again, you could be compromising some of your capabilities. And there are opportunities, within that to think, can we redefine our business model? I'll just divert for a minute. The obvious example here is Amazon. So Amazon has a service in France, right? From my knowledge. Yeah, good. So with Amazon, you might be familiar with their fulfillment service. So basically, Amazon, many years ago, totally outsourced its logistics. Now it's entirely insourcing its logistics. And why is it doing that? Because it wants control over the supply chain. It wants control over its delivery to the customer. It also then, segued into service because it needed massive service for its activities. That then allowed it to sell data centers and sell web space to companies. So now you have Amazon Web Services accounts for a large amount of its revenue. And now all it's done now is bring all of that together under a fulfillment capability. And now you have Amazon offering a service to businesses where it will market the product, store the product, sell the product, and deliver the product. I mean, I know entrepreneurs that have set up businesses where they literally never see their products. They're just selling it on Amazon. Amazon takes a 40% cut because of all it's providing. And, there is next to no cost to the business. And all of that is outsourced capability. So imagine that if you look at your value chain and you're making these sacrifices, there is maybe an opportunity to rethink, can we take these capabilities and turn them into revenue generation, which is what Amazon, has done so successfully. Some further examples I wanted to highlight here. This one here. This is Watchfinder and Co. So I have a really big interest in watches. Always had, ever since I was a kid. Love them. And when you think about it, the mechanical watch, it's the most obsolete thing ever. Absolutely archaic technology, completely blown to bits by smartwatches and everything else, yet it's incredibly lucrative. And okay, why? Well, what's interesting with Watchfinder, their revenue has grown through the pandemic, and their primary market is to sell used, pre-owned luxury watches. So Breitling, Rolex, Tudor, etc., etc. So I was curious. I bought a watch from them 12 months ago, and I was looking at their stock levels, and consistently through the pandemic, their stock levels have been going down, meaning they are selling a lot. And what this is saying is that, yeah, the business is resilient, but I think the market is resilient. And what I wanted to use this example to highlight is there are some markets that are more resilient than others. And therefore, it's not simply a case of the business being resilient. There are opportunities purely because the market is resilient. And this, segment, my guess is people might be investing in this, in watches, as an investment, not just a purchase, because of, extremely bad interest rates, etc., etc. So I'm not 100% sure what the drivers are, but there is no doubt in my mind that they are operating in a segment or a market that is more resilient than others. And I think that's important for us to consider. Jowissa, by contrast, is a third-generation family firm in Switzerland that sell watches, but they sell them at the roughly to the 300 to 400 euro price range. And again, is doing reasonably well in the pandemic. So again, you know, it's suggesting something about market dynamics that we need to be conscious of. Now, this third example is actually very close to my heart. So this is a small business that is in the town that I live in. They're called Pierce's. They're a jewelry shop, or a jewelry chain to be more precise. They have about 3 or 4 shops. Now, what's interesting is in the first lockdown in the UK, so March to July, something like that, last year, they basically did nothing. You know, they looked at their financials, they were resilient in that respect, but they took no action. That was a big mistake. In November, we entered the second lockdown. And then in January, we entered a third lockdown, which was still in. And I spoke to the owners and Pierce's, they were saying in November, in 4 weeks, they were going to fully renovate their website, launch a web shop, and sort out their logistics.
Bon, eh ben, écoute, super. Okay.
Has not happened.
Écoute, moi, je ferai mieux demain matin. Je parle avec lui.
So, unfortunately, they are still they are still trying to implement this strategy. And my point here is that their reactions were simply too late. You cannot develop and build the requisite capabilities in such a tight time frame. So again, this is where Amazon has an advantage because it's done it in the past. Looking forward then, it's who can you partner with? Which alliances can you utilize to provide these missing capabilities? And this brings me to ASOS down here. I don't know if you've ever heard of ASOS, but they're basically an online clothing retailer. They have, you know, they sell quite reasonably priced clothing, shall we say. Their market has absolutely exploded during the pandemic because people are buying a lot of relaxing clothes instead of buying office clothes. They, you know, invested heavily in an excellent online presence and invested in having, you know, good delivery partners. They don't own the logistics, but they do use good delivery partners. If you look at other fashion companies, retailers in the UK, they've been far too slow. Classic example is Marks and Spencer. I'm guessing you're all familiar with Marks and Spencer. Marks and Spencer, primarily for the last 10 years, it's not been the home and clothes that have been the revenue. They've been loss-making. The revenues come from food. In September 2019, they signed an agreement with Ocado to create an online food delivery. It took them 12 months to implement it simply because the company was so lethargic. So again, you can see what I'm trying to say here. The company took the right action, but their strategy implementation was tremendously slow. And looking back, you know, they were not ready until September 2020, which meant they lost more than 6 months where literally everybody wanted online food shopping. So what are the challenges to resilience then? On the one hand, it's management readiness and also organizational readiness. Next is, you know, reacting to short-term events without having the long-term in mind. So I think you always need to have goals as a compass for the organization. So, you know, we've seen this with, for example, fashion houses making a very quick pivot to provide PPE, personal protective equipment. That's not likely to be enduring. It may in some cases, but it's not likely to be. So it's a short-term reaction and it's good corporate social responsibility. But I think, again, longer term, you need to have a good idea of not just where your market is going, but where you as an organization want to go, because that goal has to give you a compass, or else you're going to be basically putting out fires instead of thinking about the strategic consequences of some of the decisions. The other thing, which is very close to my heart, is this concept of social capital. Now more than ever, relationships matter. And here we have the issues of, internal and external relationships. When we are in an office space, for example, we can develop these people relationships among our employees. Now they're all working at home. They have digital work routines. There are physical distances that are, we're communicating through technology. There's a dehumanization, which means for me, you can't quite build the same level of social capital or the same quality of relationship. This really matters with suppliers because, again, what are the classic reactions to cost pressures? Well, 1, cut your own costs. 2, require discounts from suppliers. Well, those suppliers are also heavily pressurized. So, if you push your cost problem onto your suppliers are going to push back. And the problem there is it runs the risk of undermining the relationship at the very point when you need to innovate. So, there is a delicate balance to be had here. And then finally, of course, there's the liquidity issue. But we can kind of counter that with the fact that interest rates are extremely low. So we do need to think about, how can we raise good capital at this time? So if we're going to achieve resilience, then we have to have a steadfast acceptance of reality. But also, I think we have to have, a strong belief in the values of our organization. What has made us successful in the past? What has brought us to this point? And what can we leverage inside the organization? And this has 2 implications. There's the soft factor, which relates to your people and your culture. And then there's the hard factor that relates to the structural aspects of, are you basically change ready? Are you innovation ready? And then there's also the ability to improvise, which I'm going to come back to at the end. Improvising meaning, can you make spontaneous changes? There's a difference between having the willingness to change and then having the ability to change. And I think that's a major challenge for senior managers that can see what needs to be done in the organization, is willing to take that action, but the organization itself is slow to respond. In terms of soft factors, I would say, concentrate on your heritage, your legacy, your vision, because that's going to provide, at the time when you are facing a lot of noise from, uncertainty and the disruptive events that are happening, the history, the legacy, the vision of your organization gives like an anchor. It sets the tone and points for what the organization has endured in the past and where it can go in the future. So this means we can then, from that, we can develop stoicism. We can develop this survival instinct that comes from our ability to leverage history. And that means it's going to be embedded in the culture of the organization, because now more than ever, you really need to bring the people of the business along with you, because rapidly implementing change is going to be super important. And I think if you map all these things through, you're going to have emotional investments. What I would say is, your heritage, legacy, vision, it gives you the ability to react. Your stoicism allows you to absorb the crisis. The culture of your business will then allow you to assimilate change. And that is what ultimately gives you resilience. And, we shouldn't confuse, like I said earlier, falling back on history and pulling into our shell, so to speak. Imagine a turtle pulling into its shell. It's resilient, but it's not going anywhere and it's not making any changes. The other 3 things I would emphasize from a hard factors point of view is, first of all, embrace uncertainties. That means that you will need to evaluate the readiness of the organization to change. This inevitably means malleable structures and work processes now, absolutely more than ever. If I would have time, this is probably for another day, but I would also ask you to look at your reward systems, because your reward systems and your control systems are absolutely critical at this point. if your reward and control systems are heavily oriented towards the bottom line, profits and cost, you are very likely going to drive a short-term perspective. So at the same time, how can we overcome that? What goals and targets can we set to try and, stretch towards change? Obviously, collaborate successfully, because this echoes what I've said before, but I cannot emphasize enough. And, I have no doubts that I'm preaching to the converted here. But I can't emphasize enough that you can't leverage ties that do not bear trust. And so in this sense, it would be fatal for any company to heavily pressurize and abuse its suppliers and partners at this time, because again, we're collectively hurting. And, I think a company needs to realize that. One example, a company called Plaza Premium Group, they run airport lounges. They're based out of Hong Kong. One of the things they did very early on was create a report that they sent to stakeholders to explain, what they were doing, how they were going to manage their relationships with their key partners and key stakeholders, to try and, create confidence with their partners that, this is a joint endeavor and, collaborate in that respect. So I think that was important because it really highlighted trust. It's the fact that, coming out of this is going to be very difficult to do it alone. And then in terms of innovation and momentum for change, it's not just business practices, but we are now needing to look at products, services, and business models and realigning all of them at this time. The only thing I will say to highlight on that is customers now more than ever have heightened sensitivity. They are super sensitive to the quality of the service, to whether or not they encounter problems. And when they encounter problems, they want solutions quickly. And they're heightened because of the same problem, because of this high uncertainty and because of this crisis. They are alert to the fact that, if they spend on travel and can't travel, they want a refund and they want it fast. If something is supposed to be delivered and it's not delivered, why is that happening? The problem could be with your logistics or your partner, not you, but it reflects on you as an organization. So, that is becoming a major pinch point for business. There is one thing I want to emphasize. There is a dark side to resilience, which again, it can lull us into thinking that we should just continue to persist with what we have always done. I would suggest that we should never forget the nuclear option, which is exit. In other words, to consider exiting the market that we are currently in, to look for better opportunities elsewhere, especially if there are going to be major structural changes to the current marketplace. For instance, in the UK, and I'm guessing this is a similar story in France, but retail has taken an absolute beating. But to be honest, again, this is not new. Retail in the UK, for instance, has been under pressure for many, many years. And in my mind, it's not the crisis that kills off companies. It's long-standing strategic weaknesses that were never addressed. All the crisis does is it makes those strategic weaknesses pinch at the same time. But it's not strictly the crisis that kills off a business. Most of the time, there have been underlying strategic weaknesses for quite some time. And we're seeing this in the UK when it comes to retail and which ones have an effective or an ineffective online presence, for example. So sometimes, it's worth considering the exit option, whether or not, okay, can we realistically continue to compete in this market, or should we consider exiting this and refocusing our activities elsewhere? And again, re-emphasize the point, customers are looking to be served exceptionally well. And some companies, especially early in the crisis, didn't realize that. And you saw this a lot with airlines and travel companies where they took months to refund the customer. I can see why from a liquidity perspective, but it was an extremely badly managed PR situation. So in terms of entering new markets and launching new products, my guess is a lot of you will be doing some of these things already. So I will, use the opportunity to re-emphasize, but equally just to press on a couple of points. One is leverage curiosity and creativity inside and outside the business. With the best will in the world, top managers are great corporate entrepreneurs, but they are not the only corporate entrepreneurs. And now is a good time to try and capture some of the creativity across your business and leverage that for innovation. And this concept of crowdsourcing is becoming more and more potent, especially outside. Then, of course, and again, this is where I am sure I'm preaching to the converted, is test ideas and always get in front of customers. And this means in terms of features, brands, messaging, and all those kind of aspects. And again, primarily because the customer is now has heightened sensitivity. So they want a business that is going to be authentic to them. So a dramatic shift in message that is not also backed up by very clear, consistent marketing, consistent branding, consistent product positioning. I would even say consistent ethics and consistent social responsibility. If these aspects are not lining up, the authenticity of the message falls. Now, I would suspect that outside of a crisis, I think we can get away with those issues and we can make adjustments, dynamically. But the problem at the moment is consumers are heightened sensitive, which means if these signals are not consistent, they are going to pick up on those signals. So I think that is a big important message here in terms of lining up both business strategy with, say, marketing strategy. Then, never forget that entrepreneurship. This is a quote from somebody in my podcast. Entrepreneurship is solving someone else's problem, which I think is quite nice. It's a good way of, pitching it. So, we can focus there in terms of, what are the different vantage points, informing our ideas, and, make sure that they're not just in-house. Another point, act small and then rapidly scale after that. We've heard of things like pivoting, fast failing, the lean startup idea, which I'm not that much of a fan of, to be honest. But what does this mean in practice? I think the first point here, now more than ever, you need a bank of social media content, for example, ready to go. I mean, one of the people that I spoke to, it was quite clear you needed 6 months of social media content ready at the point of product launch in order to continue the authentic messaging, in order to continue, the hype building, around your products and services. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is it's more crucial than ever to leverage resources and capabilities of others, and that does not simply traditional supplier partners either. So again, can you use other companies? Can you use their capabilities? Also, I would encourage you to think about which trends are likely to be irreversible. So this can be in terms of technologies, problems, solutions, products or services, the way that we live, the way that we work. Some of the things that are happening now in terms of distance remote working, they're going to stay, and that fundamentally changes who our customers are. How do we serve them? How do we even think of dealing with them? I mean, have you heard of a company called WeWork? I don't know if this is one that's you've come across. It was a bit of a comical situation, actually. WeWork, mostly invested in by SoftBank, went for an IPO in 2019 and really bombed the thing. But WeWork basically is about remote office space. WeWork's business model has been totally turned on its head, because none of us are in offices and we're being encouraged to work from anywhere. Did you know that the Bahamas is currently thriving because they are offering virtual working spaces to employees? You know, why work in your home when you can work on the beach in the Bahamas? Literally, I'm not kidding. Yeah, it was in the news over the weekend. It's become one of their most lucrative revenue generating solutions in the event of falling tourism. So again, that's a completely different change in behavior, and means that, you know, co-working spaces, office spaces, WeWork's business model just got nuked. It's a really fascinating thing, because it shows you how much people's behavior and patterns are potentially changing. Oh yeah, and to echo my own point, do not overpromise and underdeliver because of this heightened sensitivity issue. Very briefly, I'll give you an example of a company that's set up in the pandemic. It launched in March, April time. And this is a company called Whoa, and it's a beauty business. They have partnerships with laboratories in Switzerland to produce different beauty products. So, you know, for face and things, so creams, moisturizers, cleansers, all that kind of thing. Now, actually, this was set up by a friend of mine, which is why I'm so interested to talk about it. She used to work for Boots. If you're familiar with Boots, the pharmaceutical company in the UK. And she was fed up with the fact that they simply weren't innovating. So she left about 12 months before the pandemic and set up her own business. And what's interesting is you have this innovative, and this is an innovation to her company, this is a skin diagnostic. And to validate the skin diagnostic, she took it to skin experts at various universities in the UK, had them validate the diagnostic tool to show that it was accurate. Then they developed, you know, these, you know, really small single-serve sachets. They look like they're in plastic, but they are fully recyclable. So you can see already where the differentiation factors are. And, you know, from there, launched in the pandemic, and what has been, what she was emphasizing as lessons is, you know, consumers are still looking for something different. Consumers are still there. They haven't gone away. They're just looking for a different message, a different, more authentic brand, a better quality, or a different price point, or both, you know. So consumers are still there to be served. It's just that they are behaving differently. And what became apparent is the need for authentic messaging, the need for a large amount of influencer marketing and social media content. The other aspect was actually educating the market, because the market saw these like plastic containers and thought, oh, that's really bad for the environment. So they had to actually educate the consumer to say, no, 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 these are 100% fully recyclable, even if they look, you know, like plastic. So all of these were, you know, concurrent challenges, and it's being driven again by the heightened sensitivity of consumers. One thing to close here is in 2019, I created a decision-making tool with a colleague of mine.
J'écoute une webinaire.
Yeah, and yeah, so we prototyped it out of Lego, and we're hoping to develop a digital version. So what we did was we had a workshop with entrepreneurs, and we encouraged them to say, you know, what decision are you trying to make? Are you trying to enter a new market? Are you trying to launch a new product? Are you trying to become more profitable? You know, what's the goal? And then we were trying to say, okay, what's your real outcome? You know, if you're changing markets or launching new products, is that because your current products are obsolete, or because you want to serve new customers, or because you want to renew the company, or, you know, de-risk? the business. And then we're encouraging them to think, okay, well, what pre-decisions do you need to take? You know, if you want to increase profits, you can do that by cutting costs. You can kill R&D and you can reduce marketing. But how about if we grow? You know, can we serve more customers? Can we serve more markets? Can we serve better markets? Can we enter more lucrative market segments? So, you know, it's important to understand your decision, to understand precisely what it is you're trying to achieve, because that changes what strategy becomes relevant or you know, fundamentally necessary for your company. Then it's a case of looking at what is going on internally within the business that both supports, enables the strategy, but also disables the strategy and restricts it. And the same with your external factors. As part of this process, we then introduce the breaking news. You know, challenge yourself to say, okay, if there are certain types of events happen, how will that fundamentally change my ability to execute the strategy? You know, yes, it's a form of scenario planning, but it's rather trying to force you to confront challenging events. Finally, before I conclude, I wanted to draw your attention to a freely available tool about improvisation. And improvisation is really important now because, you know, it's your ability to respond quickly and make adjustments, make pivots, make changes to your actions that have meaning rather than just putting out fires. And this is a tool called the Improvisation Readiness Index, or IRIS. It's freely available at this web address down here. This is actually an innovation from my twin brother. So I have a twin brother who's a professor of strategy. And he and several colleagues developed, they've been researching improvisation for years, and they developed this tool to help a business understand where does it have capital, capability, cognition, confidence, the 10 C's. How do these affect your resource, your strategic imperative? What is your desired state and what is your actual state, so that you can understand where does your business have deficits and where you need to take corrective action. So this is a freely available tool that you can use to try and basically audit your business to understand, actually, are we ready for change? Can we make changes? You know, there's a difference again between that willingness to change and the ability to change, which kind of, you know, prefaces everything that I've said up to this point. Okay, so to conclude then, again, I would say timely action beats random action, but any action beats no action. And I can't emphasize enough that inertia is not our friend in this situation, and resilience does not mean retracting into our turtle shell and becoming hard-shelled. Equally, relationships are absolutely critical now more than ever, and the management of your supply chain is going to be absolutely fundamentally crucial. I've spoken with global supply managers that it's become very clear that if you had bad relationships in the past, you're sunk. You cannot leverage suppliers that you do not have trust and social capital with, because they've got lots of companies to serve, and you know, to borrow a phrase, you fall down the food chain if that trust is missing. Also, we can define to-do lists, but also define, you know, strategically what do we change, because rather than putting out fires and just that. And then finally, of course, just remember that, you know, let's put our entrepreneurial hats on and remember that any crisis will bring opportunities. And that allows us to rethink the business and where we can move into in the future. So if we think in opportunities first rather than threats first, we can see the pandemic in a very different mindset in that respect. So thank you very much. I realize I've overshot my time slot, but hopefully that was useful. And yeah, over to you guys for questions and discussion.